Essentially. Yeah. Yeah, just leave it. All right. We're going to go ahead and get started. A little on the early side, may as well, while you guys some of you finish eating. And we're going to start off with a little bit of an icebreaker. So today, hopefully we're going to have a decent amount of engagement. Some of it is for you guys discussing together at your table, some all together. So the first thing, I want you to take 2 minutes talking with the person next to you, 2 to 3 minutes on what inhibits change. Obviously, there's a lot of things to it, so talk about it, and then we'll share some thoughts all together. All right, so what are some of your thoughts? What are some things that inhibit change? Yeah. Closed-mindedness, all right. What else? Fear. Money. Cost of something. What else? Lack of knowledge. Great. What else? Lack of support. Stubbornness. All right. Efficiencies. How does that have to do with inhibiting change? We may go with fear. All right. Yeah. All right. Great. So I kind of brainstormed some myself, and you guys covered a lot of them. So one of lack of knowledge, right? If you don't have a knowledge about something, then there's no way you're going to change towards that. Lack of tools to implement the knowledge. So even if you have the knowledge, if you don't have tools available to help you do it well, then you're not going to be able to make that change. Cost of implementation, we mentioned. Uncertainty. So for soil moisture related stuff, if you have threshold data that's unknown, how do you safely implement it if you're not 100% sure on it? Uncertainty of the impact or the benefit. So, okay, it seems like a good idea, but where is it really going to get me? How do we quantify that? And then there's fear of the unknown. What other potential problems might arise if we make this change that we don't potentially have now? Also, there's field variability, right? So how scalable is this? If we try to do precision management with something, we know there's plenty of variability. Our block sizes are large. So that's another thing that could be, we have this fear of, even if we do it well in this one location where we're measuring it, Is it going to scale up, or am I going to have other issues elsewhere in the field? So all of these things are things that we're hoping to address today in one way or another from all of our different presentations. And so we'll kind of revisit this towards the end. Our kind of goal, I'm not sure if Sanjay and I kind of talked about this. I don't know if he's going to hit this home, but I am when I have my presentation is we talked about this goal of just to do something, try something. So for our workshop, we're going to be gaining knowledge, understand the challenges and complexities with it, right? There isn't simple solutions with things. We're going to identify some of these unknowns, but we're going to also give you some tools for addressing these challenges and unknowns. We can still potentially make changes in the midst of some unknowns. So again, our goal to do something, challenge the assumptions that you have, test the hypotheses that you have. You know, a lot of us have done things. I heard Greg say, if it's not broke, don't fix it, right? We've done things for a long time in a certain way, and it's worked well enough for us. I ended up, instead of doing my presentation like I was supposed to yesterday, I ended up going out on a farm, and we were trying to understand what's going on with seepage. So this here on the edge is right next to the ditch. Ditch is about 6 inches below here. And on the top one, water's coming in about 3 feet below. So why, and it's only coming in from the ditch side. The water table's been there for days and days and days. Why isn't it coming in from other sides? Why are we not having that movement? So, you know, this is something that the grower assumed, okay, this water table is going to be pretty constant throughout, but we don't see that. We don't see that through digging with post holes. We don't see it with digging with the backhoe. And then for some reason, where the crop's growing well here, it is coming in. It's coming in from this horizon here, and as well as from the ditch side, but not near as low. So the hypothesis was that we're getting this lateral flow, but when we dig post holes, we see that majority of the seepage irrigation water is coming up from underneath. So that's just an example of, we have these assumptions. You know, this is in a seep grower since the 80s. He's done this a long time. He's been successful, but we're able to challenge these assumptions, and we're trying to learn more and figure out where do we go from here. So that ends the little intro and chart. So next up is Doug Crawford with BNP Logic. Welcome, Doug. Thanks.
Well, to begin with, since Sanjay put the qualifiers out there in the world that we live in, anything that I may say or may not say, I don't want it to be held against me in a court of law. So yeah. BNP Logic, based in Trenton, Florida, been in the sensor business for about 9 years. We are sensor agnostic, so we use Syntec, and just the list that he had up there, we use a lot of different ones. We do default back to Syntec, and it's a lot of it is about the resolution that we're able to get out of it, just what it reads down to. The installation method is also something very important, but the challenge of when to irrigate, I spelled wrong, but it's kicking the dirt and the calendar schedule, and there's just, even when the neighbor does. That was actually on the USDA form when they done a survey of how farmers irrigate. One of the columns was when the neighbor does, and about 18% of them check that box. That's when they irrigate. But what we're doing is a new way of thinking about it. So we're going to put a sensor out there, and we're just going to listen to the crop. So what is the crop telling us that it's using, or what is it doing? And that's the way that we go about it. Because what it does, that sensor gives us is that daily crop water use. We can see it. We can see that evaporative, or the drainage from the soil. It shows it to us. We can see the depth and the distribution of root zone. We can tell you if the roots are pulling more water at the 6-inch sensor than at the 12-inch sensor. We can see those numbers. We can see the fertilizer packs through the salinity, because it reads moisture, temperature, and volumetric ion content, a salinity, measure of the salinity. We can see the saturation of we can see field capacity. We'll figure that out in a minute. We can also see the onset of stress even before you can even see it in a crop itself, before that leaf starts to wilt. And so what we're going to talk about is some principles. I think that's what we've been talking about. Principles. It's just a fundamental truth because we do business all over the country and even out of the country. And I've been on growers' fields, and he told me I've been told from Nebraska to South Florida, well, my field's a little bit different than my neighbors over there. And it's like, you got some geographic anomaly over here that's going on? But the principle I'm talking about is gravity. And the gravity is the same all over the world. Back to Sanjay's graph, the saturation point. When it's draining, guess what? Gravity's got it. And yes, we have learned that actually water never quits moving. But there is a field capacity number, and we've got the plan available and that estimation of where wilt starts at. Those are the things, that's the most important part. How do we find that? And most of it's been put together in some of these critical thresholds. We put it in a chart of blues too much, green's just right, and red's not enough. And it's based off of those numbers. The value of a soil sensor is we can identify a full point. We can identify field capacity. Yes. Yep. Yep. As far as the percentage numbers there? Yeah, that percentage, you can do the math and bring it right back to acre inches. We can convert that percentage right back to acre inches of water. How much is in that, of that 6%? Sanjay had the math up there. We can convert that all the way back. We didn't convert it to acre inches, but you convert it all the way back to acre inches. Yes. Yeah. Well, it all depends. That's why you can see on some of those sensors, you know, that top sensor, it might be in a little bit of an organic layer, and then it goes into sand, and all of a sudden you've just got a clay layer down here and probably in the middle of it. And so you go from a 6% to a 5 and a 4, and all of a sudden it jumps to 15. It's like, what in the world? Where did 15 come from? It's a clay layer or something along that layer. And some of the soils down here, we'll see the 8%, 8%, 3. You know, like what up you went down there in the spota layer. You just got down there beside it where we really got a nice beach sand waiting for the tide to come in. But the probe the sensor helps us set a full point. We can see an irrigation event, we can set refill lines, and we can see this daytime drainage in the soil, daytime use. We'll see the nighttime change. And the way we drill into this information is we start on the system here. So the lighter colored areas from 6 in the morning to 6 at night. And so we got daylight, dark, daylight, dark. And what we start looking for, this is a sum of all the sensors together. And we start seeing about 9 o'clock in the morning, about the same time we start sweating, that's when the plant starts using water. And they're going to stop that use of water somewhere about 6 o'clock in the afternoon. And so we look for this stair step, if you would. At night, we just don't see that stair step. And we start drilling in, and now we start looking at where's the rooting depth at. And we've got the 2-inch sensor, the 6-inch sensor. We can see these downward trends, but where does it stop? We've got no activity. And so the probe that sensor is helping us to identify just how deep the crop roots are. We're also able to take a look at irrigation events. If we're dealing with a 6-inch root zone or a 12-inch root zone, what kind of root zone do we have? How deep does the irrigation go? And with this particular one, you can see the 2-inch line increase, but it wasn't much of an increase here, a little bit at the next sensor. And then you look at the very next day, and it's just, you know, same irrigation, not as much movement. Like the grower asked us that very question, why? Everything makes a little bit of a difference. You'll notice that irrigation was sometime after 6 p.m. sometime after that ET, the sun had set and it wasn't pulling water as hard, we got a little bit more of an increase. We've seen a little bit more profile go down in the soil profile, as opposed to this one in the middle of the day. When it's hot, that plant's pulling water just as fast sometimes as we're putting it out. Sometimes the irrigation system just aren't designed to put all we need. It gets difficult sometimes. But we look at those rooting depths and we get to see the infiltration. You know, when we over irrigate, it impacts all those sensors. And extension agent set up home one time. He said, yeah, the plants, they don't have teeth. They just can't go out there and bite some nitrogen or bite some potash. It takes it up through, it's absorbing it through the solution. And the challenge is with looking at all that, it's complex and it's labor intensive, and looking at all these charts and that when it comes to how do you justify having sensors out there, because the last thing anybody wants is another job. That's great. Give me a sensor. That's all I need is another job to look at. And so it's hard to envision putting that to use. But there's very good information there because Sanjay's been doing he's been showing those graphs and those slopes, and it's absolutely there. So we come up with a better way to do it. And we put something into a dashboard so that it's simple. We're trying to make it easy to understand. Is there a way to calculate the full point of a soil? Yeah, there's a lot of calculations out there, and anybody wants to solve that for us, go ahead. But there's a way to calculate the full point of the soil. And so that's what it's doing. It's just giving us field name and what % full. If I took you back to the chart, the available water, you know, the line was on the top side. That was field capacity. Well, there was another one there for the stress. Where's the onset of stress at? Well, what we're trying to show here on this depiction of visual is straight up is 100% full. Straight down is where we would estimate the onset of stress based on that published data. Well, let's just say that went to straight down to the onset of stress, and it was a tomato plant. We pulled the tomato plant out and put a peanut in. You could probably go one more day. You pull the peanut out and put a cotton plant in, you could probably go one more day. So whenever we're looking for that stress number, that's probably something that's going to be the most difficult for us to define, is because one crop is going to wilt just a little bit different than some of the other, maybe some succulent ones. But those are % full. Yes. 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 That is a depiction of it. Straight up is the number for the Yes. We look at a lot of charts. We have for years and years, and we're very good, Justin and I, at identifying field capacity based on the data that we've seen. But what we did, I took Justin and took him down into our coders, and we took his brain out, we codified it and put it back in. And so what we've got the system doing is we've got the system doing 3 different calculations of where field capacity is based off of the numbers, based off of what we see happening. Is it perfect? No. Can we get to 100%? No. Our system doesn't cost $35,000. But wow, that's a lot of money for that thing. But that's what we're doing. Yes. Yeah. The answer, short answer, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So what we're doing next is this available water. So we're coming back to that published data. You know, we're basing what we see for drainage on the soil and where's the field capacity at? We're estimating field capacity. Well, if we're estimating field capacity, then we're also estimating where the stress point's at. So if we're estimating that, then we can give you how much available water that you got. And so those are the numbers that we're putting in there automatically. That percent moisture is simply, it's based off of the very last readings, and the root activity depiction over there is just where we see the different stair steps for each individual sensor. So we're letting the sensor show us how deep roots are. And if you've got roots to 14 inches and you're irrigating to 20, you figured out you're washing fertilizer away. But also at the same time, if you got roots to 14 inches and you're not quite getting it to 14, hey, you got to pick up the pace a little bit, because we are going to see, you know, good root systems that go 20 inches. We're also going to see, you know, some of the high water tables that you'll have down this part of the world, because plants take up water differently. They just take up water differently. And we're just letting the crop tell us what is going on out there. We throw a little simple 7-day graph up there. It's something, just a visualization. You know, I plugged in a program I'm doing Monday, Wednesday, Fridays. Is my program working? Yes or no? That's the sort of thing. With the weather ET, the information there, yes, we're just using a service based off the GPS position of that particular probe. So it's all API stuff. So we get yours, we can put your data in there as well, if you got a weather station with that. Yep. Yes. So yeah, there's a day-night trend, day-night trend, day-night trend, day-night trend. Yeah, I can't tell. I cannot tell. No, we're just assuming that it's since we're having a downward trend during the day, hey, that's plant uptake. Since we're not having any kind of a downward trend at night, yeah, we're just assigning every bit of it to plant uptake in our calculations. Is that completely accurate? No, but it is accurate to the point that we have a full point and it's leaving the full point. One way or the other, we've got to put it back. With the ret, is it ET, is it transpiration, or is it actually plant using it? So we got to put it back. The key is trying to find that number. Okay. And it's so we take all those things, all those ways to be able to figure that out. And that's, you know, that's calculations. The best I recall, Justin told me there's over 60,000 calculation that goes into that every time it updates, just to be able to get that. And just to take, you know, I don't know if I got another one after that one, actually. Yeah, we'll talk about this, but since we are talking about the full point. So we talk about that graph and that line, and we're looking for that stair step. Well, let's just say this is the field capacity number, and we're estimating the wilt. Whenever we see that line go up and it's a precipitous drop, we know up here, if it's coming down so fast, gravity's got it, it can't hold it. And what Sanjay is saying, when that line starts to level out, that's field capacity. That's where it's at. That's what we're looking for in each one of them. Some of these other irrigations, you might see it come up and just kind of round over, or if it comes up and it just tails off. You can see the difference in some of the irrigations. So how do we identify field capacity? Well, we're looking at every single sensor in that root zone. And so we're finding out where does that number start to level out? Is it perfect as that machine could be or will be? No, it's not. But we can get you really, really close into the ball game. Yeah, it is. And so much conversation about, you know, what is my percentage number? 6, 13, 12, 9, 8, 6. You know, what is my percentage numbers in the bed? Well, absolutely, it does change when you compressed everything, you packed everything. But what I'm saying is that doesn't matter. Did we find field capacity? Yes, we did. Because we're not looking at the number specifically, we're looking at the relationship of the number to how did it come to flatten off? How did it flatten off? That's what we're looking at with every one of those calculations. We tried to make it a little bit easier. You don't have to remember nothing with ours. All those formulas Sanjay had, forget them. We got it this way. We've got all those kind of formulas plugged in, but that's exactly what we're doing. That's the way we're basing it off of, is where does it start to come back down. And all that stuff is great. But if you don't have some service, you don't have some help. We've been doing it for 9 years, starting into the 10th year, middle of this year. But man, that probe the sensors are still telling us things that still tells us things. My wife was an ag teacher for a long time, and I told her, I said, we got to have a plan. We need something to be able to take every single customer through the steps. And that's where the transformation from where your team is now, maybe you don't know anything about soil sensors or what we just talked about, but we're going to teach some of these principles. We're going to start with water holding capacity, some of the very basic agronomy stuff, water holding capacity, root development, and that timings of the irrigation. Did it get to the full point? Yes or no? Those are the things that we coach through. And then we're looking at the VIC, because I didn't really cover that at all. I wasn't sure about my time. But I tell you, we got some exciting stuff coming up about the VIC. We're doing some work on it as well. Oh, man. But as Dr. George Hockman said, that it's the water. And if we've got a root zone of 14 inches and we're keeping the irrigations in 14 inches, then the fertilizer takes care of itself. We can't be 100% efficient in all of those irrigations. You'll never be 100% efficient on that, nor 100% efficient with your fertilize and keeping it there. You're going to have some that passes through, but we help you to understand that relationship of those numbers of what we're seeing. We can't tell you that you've got 10 pounds of nitrogen and 10 pounds of potash. It doesn't work that way. Everything is kind of measured in a batch of nutrients. But then we start talking about managing for quality, and for the citrus guys, it's reducing moisture in the soil so that the Brix counts increase. Well, same thing for the watermelon guys. Yes, it will. Yeah. So the answer is we're almost done with that, as a matter of fact. In a greenhouse side of it, you take that back to you want your EC for a tomato plant. It's going to be what, 2.2 to 2.8 is the EC range for I think that's what university has got some published numbers on. And so, yeah, how can we draw that number back to there? We're doing in the middle of some stuff right now that's going to help us really pinpoint that number. So what is that? So that we can do a lot like this right here. We've got a VIC reading. Where's the upper bound and the lower bound? And how am I doing? Am I staying in those bounds? Yeah. Yeah. So right over here. So yeah, so a sensor is at 2 inches, a sensor is at 6 inches, a sensor is at 10 and 12. Yeah. Sometimes not. I mean, yeah. Every time we pump water past the bottom of the root zone, every time we go past 100%, yes. Every time you go past 100%, yes. Because we're identifying the root zone. And we can't be so conservative that we're not ever putting some to the very bottom sensor. But the idea is, can we manage that crop so that the bottom sensor hardly ever is reflective of an irrigation event? If you can do that, yeah. You can do that on that 1 acre that Sanjay's got. So yeah. But it helps you drill in on some of those irrigation events. Many times it's just, can I cut 15 minutes off of an irrigation, or can I add 15 minutes to it? That may be all it takes. As a matter of fact, that's the increments that we suggest. We don't ever tell anybody how to irrigate, when to irrigate, how much to irrigate. We do make some comments on the charts, and that's the way we communicate, is through text back and forth through this, so that you can look at it on your schedule. But we'll make suggestions that, hey, this irrigation event, it took you to 135%. I suggest that, if you're going to stay on that same schedule, cut 15 minutes off of the runtime. And those are the things that we can do to help drill those in. But that's part of the transformation side of it, is we're trying to make one just as easy as your truck dashboard. You get in it and you can tell me how much I've got in the tank, how far I'm going to go till I'm empty, and how much I'm using in a miles per gallon. And so we're trying to make that with our dashboard just as simple, easy to use, so that we're not creating another job. The sensors, they are extremely accurate. They are, they never lie. They just never, ever lie. Now, what we've also found out is where you put them matters. And you need to be as consistent with the installations, and we are down to how you drive in a field and what part of the field you put it in. But it's also down if we're using a bed with one drip tape, we've got a procedure for it. We got a bed with double drip tapes, we got a procedure for it. But it matters where you put it and the data that you get out of it. It makes a difference. BMP Logic. We've got some customers in here. Really appreciate seeing you guys here. But we ain't got everybody, but we'd like to have. So come see me.
If you don't mind taking a seat. We are going to keep this next one a bit discussion oriented, and having some time to talk with your neighbor, talk about some things that we threw in front of you, but you can keep that aside for now. All right. So most of you know me. I'm Craig Fry. I'm the extension agent for vegetable production in Southwest Florida, and appreciate you all coming today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about lessons learned with the soil moisture probes. I've gotten to have probes for the last couple of years, put them in a lot of different crops, different irrigation systems, and have gotten to learn a lot through that. Still have plenty to learn, but wanted to pick out some key things that hopefully will be helpful for you in that, as well as just irrigation management in general. So to start out, I always like talking about goals, right? If we don't have a goal, then sometimes we just do things out of habit, and we're not evaluating what we're doing. So what are irrigation management goals? I typically think about irrigation management goals as applying the amount of water necessary to achieve our nutrient management goals, right? So that typically includes a bunch of different things: maximizing our crop quality and yield, achieving the greatest economic return we can, minimizing environmental impacts. So if those are our nutrient management goals, how does irrigation management fit into that? A lot of what we've heard about field capacity and permanent milting point is having this goal of minimizing our crop stress. And then, of course, we've talked a bunch about keeping nutrients in the root zone. How in the world do we do that? How do we do that on an economic scale? What does that look like? And again, kind of the takeaway that I want, as we talked about at the very beginning, what I'd like you to get out of this is do something, try something, test one of your hypotheses, something that you've always thought about how things work, and see if it's true. We've got, I've got some of the, Sanjay showed a bunch of sensors. There's HydroSense up here. Here's some of the Field Scout, the TDR sensors, where you just stick it in the ground and see for wherever length your probe is, what is your soil moisture content. I've got a number of Doug's BMP Logic probes. I know some of you have them yourselves, but I have them for the purpose of just getting them in growers' hands, seeing what we can learn together. So even if you're not using my probes, I can still join in the conversation with you all and work with you what you're seeing on your farm. So I know you know this, but a quick reminder, what are the 5 R's? We typically talk about 4 R's, but there's 5 R's in nutrient management. It's our right source. Are we continuing to evaluate that? Right rates, right placement, right time, and right irrigation. So all those are necessary. So 2 quick things about nutrient movement for our plants. So we kind of have 2 main things that are happening. One is diffusion. So this is like if you put a dropper of dye into water, you have it really concentrated, and then it diffuses out. And so what's in that high concentration, that drop, is going to move. So some of our phosphorus, potassium, and some of our micronutrients are generally considered to kind of follow more the diffusion side of things. Potassium is actually a bit more both. Mass flow is looking at a little bit more of what's in the solution. And so some of our other nutrients tend to move a little bit more this way. And so of course, how do we get them keep them in the root zone is our goal with that. And these both kind of boil down to right placement for some things. So that's why we often band our phosphorus, because it moves by this concentration gradient. And right irrigation is important, because whenever you have it in your soil solution, whether it's by diffusion or in that solution itself, it has the potential to move, whether it's upwards if you're having evaporation happening, or downwards from irrigation or rain. We'll kind of skip through some of this to save some time. You guys have seen all of this already today. When we think about keeping nutrients in the root zone, it's really doing the same thing as minimizing crop stress. So back for this one here, you kind of see this picture with when you're a little bit above field capacity, there is some stress. We often don't really see it. We still think we have a healthy crop. But as even some of you in this room have reported, as you seek to manage irrigation a little bit more finer, sometimes some of the field variability actually goes away when we stay under this field capacity side, when there's still oxygen available in our roots. We find out that we minimize some of that field variability that we had when there was a lot of saturation happening. So if our goal is to keep nutrients in the root zone, again, we know there's challenges to that, but we do the best we can with the tools that we have at any given time, right? And so we have to know what our root depth is at any given time. We have to have some estimate. What is our approximate root depth? And it doesn't have to be the bottom roots, right? Because even if your roots are going down to 2 feet, where are 80% of your roots? Say for tomatoes, if your roots are down to 2 feet, where do you think 80% of your roots are? Yeah. So 8, 10, 12 inches, somewhere around there, right? What is our effective root zone compared to our total root zone, and how do we look at that? So that's just something to think of. There isn't necessarily a perfect answer for that. If you are irrigating for that 80%, you know, if you have a little bit going past it, you still have roots there. So it's not like you're in trouble. So that's one thing to think of. When we're thinking about field capacity and our initial soil moisture, Sanjay was highlighting the importance of that. You know, that's, again, the same idea of minimizing crop stress. So if we're looking at keeping nutrients in the root zone, we're minimizing our crop stress. And then we already talked some about calculations. All right, so this type of probe, what are some of your thoughts on we'll start with advantages. What are advantages of this type of probe? Where you stick it in, you get a reading. Not intrusive, what else? Mobile, portable? Okay, instant, great. What else? It's not in your way or some of your cultivation practices or whatever it may be, depending on the crop. In one block, you can get a bunch of readings, right? Versus typically when you have some more expensive probes, you just have one in a block. So relatively simple, right? You don't have all these different things happening. You have an average across whatever your length of this is. So disadvantages. What are some of your thoughts? Manually do it. Yep. So, yep, that instantaneous thing is helpful, but then it's also, that's all you see. Say that again. Okay. So yeah, I came up with some of those same things, and then also you don't have any eyes below that. If you don't have multiple sensors, you just have this average and what's happening across that average, but you don't necessarily know how it's changing throughout the horizon. All right, what are some advantages for this type of probe? Multi-level, accuracy, what else? Continuous is helpful. Less labor, you don't have to be out there. That's one of the other things. If you're actually trying to compare your data, you have to be doing it at the same time every single day if you're putting one of those TDI probes in. All right. Exactly. Yeah. And you don't have to be in the field to see the data, right? Now, obviously, there's some other probes that you can install that you also don't have to be there, but just some advantages for those. Some disadvantages. More expensive. You have to install them properly. Yeah. What else? Sanjay.
It's really hard. What is that? If you get something wrong with that paper, wherever that is installed,
if you have to identify that so that you can then move it. Otherwise, if you're just taking the numbers as they come, then yep, you only have that one location. Great. All right, so we're going to go through a couple examples. I'm going to have a couple that we're going to do together, and then there's a couple on your table for you to do with the person next to you. So so what I've tried to do, obviously, we can't all look at all the different points across time, but I tried to highlight for all the different figures I'm going to give you. This isn't on your paper in front of you. So first, just look up here. So this one here is it's actually a crop that's planting in planting holes where they put a lot of compost. The field capacity of that is therefore unknown. Exactly what it is, and also in how they're irrigating somewhat. The evapotranspiration of this specialty crop is unknown. Effective rooting zone is about 18 inches. So what would you recommend with what you see here? Yep, we're seeing it, even though we don't exactly know what our target should be for those numbers, we know that we're moving water, and so we can cut it off completely, start reducing it by half as much if you're really scared about the top ones drying out. But there's something you can do, right? With a whole lot of missing information, there's still something we can do by looking at this. All right, next one. This one is sand. So field capacity 8, I would say 9 to 12, but 8's fine, somewhere around there. It was pepper installed about early bloom. This is actually just about the first month or so. But again, it was installed a little bit late, not at planting. 2 drip tapes, somewhat smaller plots. It was a seed company. And what do you see? I know it's a little bit hard, but what are some of your thoughts? I'm gonna stop. Yeah, so even though we like to see consistency, right? Which we see here, but everything is super wet, right? So the water table is super high, and we're still actually This was actually irrigating about 5 times a day for 15 minutes, including at night. So obviously it was smaller than what a lot of your zones are, but this is what was happening with it. So we started to make some changes in the new year and have some conversations together. And this is where they went from right at the end of that last figure that we saw up to mid-February. And now you can see values that are a whole lot closer to what field capacity might be in there. So they reduced irrigation significantly, obviously, over that time. I mean, this here is like a whole week where nothing really happened, I guess, kind of over the holidays. There was also the cold weather, so they pumped a bunch of water. But their main goal here as they started irrigating was how do we need to make sure the top 2 inches doesn't dry out, but we really need to get our water table down. We need to allow our plant to take up as much as possible. Yes. It was 2 drip tapes, mostly slow release, but they did have some going through drip as well. I think it was a constant feed. I think they were just doing it in every application, if I remember correctly. So during this cooler period, they were able to adjust and realize, okay, we can actually just do 1 irrigation event in our small block for 15 minutes, and that's enough. So significant change for them. And then obviously from that time on, so that was during the winter months, then it increased. And so, but by having this information, they were able to see it, they were able to not get behind because they knew what their targets were, what their wilting point or their threshold point that's in between that, as Sanjay was mentioning. They're able to target that and then stay above that as they went forward. So that's thinking about our top-down irrigation. How about seepage irrigation? How do those goals affect it? Well, we still have this same goal of minimizing our crop stress, right? So, and we know we're going to have this huge gradient from being oversaturated at our water table up to the top. So we basically want, how I think about it is in our upper profile, we want it to be close to that threshold where we're not our permanent wilting point, but our threshold number where we know where we're not having stress. If we can manage it there, or whatever depth that we think we're okay with, then we can keep it a constant water table there until, of course, we get rains and that throws things out of there. But that can kind of be our goal for it. So what that does is, as much as possible, seepage irrigation, I mean, every field that I put these in seepage, it is wet as can be, usually above 12 on the top sensor, the 2-inch one. If we're able to drop our water table some, we're able to get some more oxygen in there, we're able to have some more healthy roots and not stress it in that way. So, and then again, part of why I showed you this earlier is, so we have some of our nutrients are moving through this high to low concentration. So our water table is going to be, how is that going to be related to high and low concentration? Water table is going to be low, right? Because that's your bulk water. So the higher you have your water table, closer to where your nutrients are going to be, diffusion is going to happen, right? And it's becoming out of that root zone because of that, or it's going to become so diluted that it's just less and less available. So so that's why this is important in seepage irrigation, let alone then having rain events and other things like that. All right, so a seepage example. This is actually one that seemed to be about as good as I had hoped. And it was kind of a matter of luck. This is just one of the fields happened to look like this. If we think our field capacity is somewhere 8-9%, maybe even 10%, depending on the location, then at the 2-inch soil profile, we're below that as much as we can. And it was basically fairly constant across there until the end when we got rain. So for something like this, you could play with it and try to fine tune it a little bit more. But basically it was between all the top sensors between 7 and 8% the whole time. All right, so now it's your turn. So you have, I don't actually know how they stapled them. 3 on the front one or 2? 3 on the front. All right. So now I gotta remember. So this is on the back. So go to the second page and talk with your neighbor about what you see there. You have a little information on there as well of what's happening soil-wise and some other things. So take a minute, talk with your neighbor, see what you see, and then we're going to report back and say what you would recommend. All right, go. All right, so report back. What do you see from this? What do you think? What things would you want to further investigate? What would you potentially recommend? All right, so potentially coming past your 10-inch one. So maybe reducing the irrigation duration. What else do you think? Other thoughts? So the so your 10-inch, when you're talking about the one on top here, the 10-inch one is, I think that's the one on top on yours too.
We say soil hold capacity is still 12, right? Yeah, we're reading 30.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yep. Yep. Exactly. So what's happening is where's your water table? What's your guesstimate? Yep. So your water table is at 10 inches from the top of this bed. So even though drip irrigation is happening, or that's how it's being fertilized, your water table is so high. And sometimes that's actually, you don't really see much blips down here at your 14 and 18-inch sensor. Because it's so wet, when you get saturation and then you have a little bit of drip irrigation going below there, you barely see anything in that, right? Yeah. Yep. And if we're saturated and then we're continuing to put water in that profile, that's not doing us any good. So how about this is the same part of it. So what do you see here? What do you learn from this? So this was about 2 inches from the base of the plant, and basically halfway between the base of the plant and the edge of the bed, because we had a double crop on it. Does this concern you? What are your thoughts? So this was just a single one. So this time frame, I forgot to tell you, is a little bit different. This one was installed about halfway through, so it's from there to here. But yeah. Yes. So the reason that we put two in here, it's in the same bed, it's only a couple feet from each other, is because many growers have communicated to me that they're scared of the bed shoulders drying out. Now I know that's potentially changed some for those that have adopted some of the bed geometry from Sanjay's work, but especially if you're talking about wide beds, folks talk about, I'm scared that I'm going to dry out the shoulders and not be able to re-wet them. Yep. What do you guys think? Depends on when your roots are. So why, Wes? Yeah. 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 So what we saw was that this being in the middle, which is about a foot from the base of the plant, about 2 feet apart. So a foot away from that top one, and then only 2 inches away from this one on the opposite side to your bed edge. Where the majority of the roots were towards the middle. Now, obviously that's where your water is, right? There were roots at lower depths that were still closer to the edge of the bed. Definitely not in the top. But the question is, does it really matter? We're still wet, yeah. Yep. Yep. This is a double row on one bed. Yep. So yeah, so on the sheet it tells them, this one's in the middle of the bed, this one is on the shoulder in between the plant and the very edge of it. And so my thought is with it, if the grower still thinks it looks like a good crop, then we know we don't have to worry about this. It's fine. I mean, is it cause and effect? Is because we dried it out so much that the roots were in the middle? Maybe. If we kept it wetter, the issue was with one drip tape, we couldn't keep it any wetter, right? We were already past saturation. We were already every single irrigation of that at 3 times a day, going it to our water table. So there's no way to actually keep this any wetter. But does it really matter if you still have a healthy crop with it? I mean, you could go to 2 tapes, right? And then try to manage it a little bit more precisely. Or you say, okay, I'm fine with my roots growing towards the middle. There's still the issue of the saturation that could be addressed. But so those are a couple of things I just wanted you to think about is just because depending on where a soil moisture sensor is, we've talked about that, mentioned it briefly a couple times, it's important. But I also like to say, well, what is your greatest fear? And let's investigate that. And is that fear valid, or how do we set up some additional thresholds for that particular location to understand it? And then in the future, we can potentially just calibrate it with what we're doing. We don't need to always, right? But once we learn it, then we can calibrate and say, oh, we're actually always fine because our crop's healthy when we're at that range. Does that make sense? All right, let's go to the next one. So this one is back on the front. You've got 3 different figures that are all the same farm, 3 different blocks. Tell me what you think. All right, we'll try to go through this one a little bit quicker. What are your initial thoughts? Mhm.
11, 13, 16, and all of this whole thing.
Mhm.
That's hard, you know,
Yeah.
not knowing the language.
Yeah.
It's hard to make that, hard to make a recommendation. Don't
Yep.
know the full type of thing,
Yep.
right?
Yep. Fine. So we know that the heavier soil, what we typically call heavier, it's higher in our. Basically, they said that in each of these ditches, they've kept the same height, right? So the height is the same in all 3 ditches. I can't remember if I wrote that on there or not for you. But we're seeing high numbers where it's a heavier soil. What's the next thing we need to do? Maybe we don't have a recommendation yet. Maybe we figure out we need to go and actually try to get a little bit better idea of what this field capacity is so that we can give a recommendation. If just one thing is glancing at this, if we say it's sandy loam, then that 50% is right around 10, 11%. And that's where it is there. This is quite high here. So I wouldn't want to recommend a grower do something because of what you see on this chart, which has a lot of averages, but at least you know, okay, well, maybe this other field is looking pretty good, has a good crop. Maybe we could try to back off a tiny bit, drop the level a little bit and see what happens. Or do it on the smallest block that you have and continue monitoring. So, all right, to kind of conclude here, things that I've learned is that as an industry, we keep things quite wet. And that's basically the starting point of every single farm that I've gotten to work with, putting these in. So another thing is trends and values are equally important. So I think the first time I was learning about soil sensors, it was up North Florida where you have deep sands and you think about, okay, well, let's keep the trend the constant. But when you have this high water table, that can fool you, all right? So while they do indicate consistencies, sometimes we don't get to see those change in values when your water table is so high. And you do have some type of overhead irrigation going down to lower levels. So probe placement is critical. We've mentioned that a couple times. I like to do it within the wetting zones. So 2 inches, Sanjay was talking about like a 4-inch radius, 8-inch diameter for a cylinder. If you have it about 2 inches away from the plant, then you can actually calculate if I know this emitter is going to let this much out over this runtime, I should expect it to go this far down in my soil because of what my initial soil moisture was and knowing what my field capacity is. And then you can test it and see how close you are. I was able to do that with some of the farms. And if you don't have a probe right there, if you have it 6 inches away or a foot away, it's not going to work out. But then, of course, standardizing for comparisons and then evaluating your fear. I think that's important. What is it that what's holding you back in making a change? And then, is that valid? It may be, and it may not be. But in anything, do something with some of this information you have. Again, some of these, we didn't really have much information about some of these charts that we saw, what field capacity was, but we could still make some either recommendations or let's do this course of action to figure out more. All right, I'm going to stop with that. And we'll go ahead on to our next speaker. So next, we're going to hear a little bit about the mobile irrigation lab from Bob.
Bob Beck. I retired from NRCS about a couple years ago, but I came back. And they asked me to speak about the irrigation lab. I'm interested. Mobile irrigation lab is really just one of the tools that we found. Plan B. Yeah, it's on. Our mobile irrigation lab is sponsored by the Higher Soil and Water. They're the help. Is anybody having a problem hearing me? No, I'm another one, a big mouth. All right. Department of Agriculture, of course, has been involved, Natural Resource Conservation Service that I used to work for. And of course, the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. We operate in Collier, Lee, Hendry, Glades, and a portion of Charlotte that's in the South Florida Water Management District area. If you want to take down our number, the fellow to speak to is Nick Nikolic. He'll be the guy taking information from you. He'll interview you. Once he gets to the site, he'll do an audit of the pump. A lot of the parameters that are really important in a system is system pressure, pressure at the emitters. So the initial testing is pressure testing. Make sure all the submains have sufficient pressure and are relatively even. Why? Micro irrigation emitters, whether they're spray jets or drip, are very often pressure dependent to get you to flow that it says it's supposed to be. Okay. In a lot of the vegetable systems, you'll have a pressure regulator out there in the field with a lot of hoses coming off of it that feeds each drip tape. In the citrus systems, you don't usually have that. The system pressure is going to be determined by your pump, your losses at the filter, and then of course the pipe design. Once the evaluation is completed, they also check your TDS and pH of your water. And a written report gets delivered to you determining where the pressure problems might be, what other problems there may be in the system, and some suggested ways of fixing it. The evaluations are scheduled around your operation. It's strictly voluntary. You don't have to do it. However, if you're enrolled in the BMP program, you are supposed to be doing it. And if you want to get involved in cost share to do improvements, then you definitely have to have it done. since these marriage has taken place in the programs, if you're not enrolled in the BMP, correct me if I'm wrong, if you're not enrolled in the BMP program, the mobile lab's not going to work on your system. So in a way, it's kind of required. If you do ask for an evaluation, if you have a design of the system, it's really a big help, because if we discover problems, very often it's in the design or the installation itself. If we know what's supposed to be down below ground, it helps. We also have a fancy gadget to check your flow meters. I think it's required in order to meet BMPs is to have your flow meter calculated once a year, certified once a year to make sure it's accurate. Hand tools, graduated cylinder and pressure gauges. It's pretty cavemanish, but you can actually through the year supply some of these to your field crews, and they can actually do spot checks throughout the year, not just the once in a lifetime you get the mobile lab to come out. So it's a good diagnostic tool to make sure that your system remains efficient throughout the irrigation season. Starts at the pump station where everything starts. That's where the water comes from. Again, the pump determines how much pressure you're going to get going into the system. Submains are the main pipes going out to the different fields. We check pressures in those. Pick a representative area, either in the field or the grove block or whatever units you have that are typical of the whole farm system. What we're actually doing, besides the pressure checks, is taking time flow rates out of the emitters. If it's a spray jet, we can just stick it right in the graduated cylinder, time it, and you know how much is coming out. We can check to see whether it's within the manufacturer's specifications. Drip is a little different. Kind of have to drip it into a cup and then measure it, but it's a direct measurement in the field by hand. And again, if your field crews continue to learn how to do it through the year, you can continue to check to see how your system works. When I did it in the field extensively, I found that throughout the irrigation season, because of mostly water quality, you have drip tape or micro irrigation emitter clogging from calcium or iron or what have you in the water. So you can expect a degradation in your uniformity, which is the big measurement we're doing, is emission uniformity. That water is going equally throughout the same irrigation block every time you run it. If it's not designed right, you could have more water coming out at the beginning, less at the end, no good. The end of the rows are going to suffer. Again, this is typical in the citrus. The rows and spacing and all that makes a big difference. It helps in calculating how much water and runtime. Same as it is in vegetables. As Sanjay talked about, different bed configurations, plastic, this, and there's a lot of variables. I don't think we do too much of that anymore. And of course, once we're there, and it's another thing your field crews can be on the lookout all the time when you're looking around. Sometimes big leaks are very visible. Sometimes it takes a little more experience and knowledge of the farm itself to determine if you got leaks. Leaks are a big problem. Needless to say, that's water lost. It's going to reduce the pressure in that area. I've seen managers come to me and show me, and I don't know what's going on over here. In the citrus grove, you could see the pattern of spray coming out, and all of a sudden, look at this block here. It's not working very well. And then all of a sudden you find out, well, the flow meter says the water's going there, but it's obviously gone somewhere else. If you look around, you may determine exactly where it is. Again, the big number is going to be the emission uniformity, which will also determine a level at which we have a table, depending upon the kind of system it is, where there's a minimum number, a minimum percentage number, emission uniformity. If it goes that low or lower, then you're eligible for assistance. And I believe it's in NRCS's programs as well. If you're operating perfectly, well, there's no need to do anything. If you're below the minimum, then it's time to do something about it. We try to give you an irrigation water management scheduling. After listening all day today, the components related to how much water you're putting out based on the way the system's performing and how it's been evaluated, not just designed, but how it's actually performing, makes a big difference, of course. But the soils is a very big very big variable. Unfortunately, we're relegated to using pretty much the soil survey values for the mapped soils. Once soils are bedded, shaped, leveled, drained, a lot of those numbers can change. And we'll tell you right away in the scheduling guide, this is based on numbers, like a lot of the other stuff is. So look, it has to be validated in the field by your own observations. If we find that you did need some help and you wound up getting some assistance or did it on your own and you made improvements, you can call for a reevaluation to make sure that what you did actually produced some improvement. That will be a follow-up. Again, if you need the number, there it is. Anybody got any questions? Short and sweet, that's it. If you have any other questions, call the fellows that do it.
Does the farm manager have to kind of, do they just give you a little bit of what's happening and you go, or do they have to be with you the whole time? How's that usually work?
Okay. They would prefer that whoever operates the pumps is there to operate. If we'd been at the farm repeatedly and it's not a real complicated situation, we could eventually take over some of that. But the initial visit and the initial evaluation should be with whoever it is that operates it. So at least we know the guy that's going to operate it tomorrow is the guy that's operating it today. The likelihood is that's the way it's going to be operated all season. And we avoid the possibility of doing equipment damage by doing something wrong. So yeah, it helps. All righty.
Is this on? Oh, no. Okay.
Next up, we have Sonia Lee, and she's going to tell us a little bit about electronics and ways for efficient management with smart controllers.
Okay. First of all, is thank y'all for having me here today. And I would like to say we have sent people to the mobile lab, especially when we have establishments that seem like they've acquired a new establishment. They don't know much about the pumping stations. They don't have any of the paperwork. The first thing we want to know about is the pressure and the flow rate. So then that helps all of us be able to build systems. Let's do that. Now you're gonna make me feel like the old lady up here. I've been playing with this technology for over 30 years. Agtronics 29 years old. A lot of people think that our goal is to make every drop count. Everybody thinks that, oh, Agtronics is just an irrigation company and we sell pipe and valves, and that's not the case. Actually, we're the tools company. We're the fun one that hooks up to everything and gets everybody else's headache involved. Going back to the pump stations again, whether it's pond surface water, drip fields. I know there's a few of y'all that's seen some of this, but I have added some other things since we last met with some newer stuff. Again, whether it be greenhouses, whether it be drippers, again, we're doing one. Where's the pointer thing? One that's feeding. Which one's the pointer one? Where is it? The red thing? Okay, well, no, that ain't gonna work. Well, in this one, for example, one's a feed tube and one's an irrigation tube in this greenhouse. So which one's on the red pointer thing? Okay, all right, perfect. Then we've been working on automating and flowing on the pivots. We're almost there. We're writing the code to actually take control of some of the panels. That's in our goal in our future. We're already monitoring, turning on the diesel engines and monitoring the other devices around them. Again, the tools, it's important for our water meters and fertilizer meters. These are the custom panels. Again, people keep talking about no farm is the same. You can't go to us and say, give me a quote on 5 systems. Like you're going to the Ford company, go get me an estimate for 5 white Fords, 4-wheel drive. Every farm is customable. There's no farm that is the same. Again, talking about the code over the years. We've now written the code and about bringing in API and third party. We've written the engine code for the Murphy panel. So you can see your diesel engine, batteries, their water pressure, temperature, oil levels, different things on the engine, as well as bringing in the weather data, as well as bringing in the soil moisture data, EC. Again, how the device works. This is typical system where we have a server based or PC based. This is I call it your grandpa. He's the boss of everybody. And he then talks by radio or cellular to the links out in the pumping stations as we're collecting all the data, the water rates, the fertilizer rates, back flushing the filters, the weather stations, the ETs, the alarms, the high flows, the low flows, the battery voltages. This is a Motorola software. Going back to playing with this in DOS days. If anybody knows about DOS? Now we're to what's cool on our latest technology of our screenshots is actually getting to see the rate of the actual pump stations. Used to you haven't changed some colors, but now you have the actual flow rate on the custom screens, what zone is on, how much quantity. They're putting out 18,000 gallons of water, what the flow rate is, the expected flow, how much fertilizer is there, what's the rate of the fertilizer. When the DP or the time hits, the back flush of the filters can start. Multiple pump stations. In our old system, you can only see one at a time. Now you can see multiple of what's going on. Alarming, if we get a high flow, low flow, you can set up to send a text to the irrigation manager or the person that needs to get this message. Now going back to the different tools again, we have fans. Going back to temperatures, this is showing a typical like greenhouse where that we have if a temperature hits so high, we might turn on a fan, we might turn on the curtain, we might again, it's all an implementation of advanced technology, of being able to write commands that if this happens, do that, if that happens, do that, contact somebody if this happens, shut things off in an emergency situation and contact somebody. Again, now going back to the data of collecting all your irrigation as well as your scheduling, and can make your adjustments anywhere from this field here. They're gonna do 24,000 gallons of water. How much is actually going out, what the flow rate is, how much the expected flow rate, how many cycles a day. Again, who is finished, who's watering, who has an issue. A lot of times and a lot of other technologies have to go and change constantly, depending on your crop. You can have, for example, you will call your beginning planting, where maybe you're only putting so much water and fertilizer. Then when you get finished, instead of giving it clear all that, you just unactivate the boxes you don't want to use. And go on to the next level, maybe we're in the next stage, or maybe we're in dry season, we have multiple cycles, or we're in wet season, or we're low in the cycles. All this is a lot of homework that can be done ahead of time, and then actively and deactivating these boxes here to adjust the irrigation accordingly to what's going on in the field. Now we're talking about water reports, fertilizer reports. Again, now we're collecting all the data, bringing it into the nutrients, and you can make graphs and reports. Used to we can manually pull these reports. Now in the newer system, you can set it up that if when you need, for example, the water done, you get the water report at the end of the month, and every pump station. Maybe somebody needs it once every 3 months, once a week. Again, these are all customer customized and can be sent on either Excel spreadsheet or documents, however they need to be sent to the area. Then going back to collecting the data, how much actually water was used and daily and accumulations and the total amount. This is now this is now something working on. Oh, shoot. Leave it to me to tear it up. So this goes back, and darn it, who we're talking about, we're working with. There, this is something that's through some of the new AI of collecting technology, and Randy's can be very familiar with this. Over the years, the most important thing that a grower has asked me is, can I know how much water's, and I'm gonna give you an example. We're gonna water in 3 zones, but this zone is 5 acres, this zone is 8 acres, and this zone is 12 acres. And originally, unless you had a flow meter on each main line of that, you didn't have that technology. You had one number, and then you had to try to figure it out. Now with advanced technology in here, they can actually apply the per acreage per the zone, and the calculations now can come out through the smart system and determine from one flow meter at the main line what the actual smaller 4-acre zone got compared to the 12-acre zone compared to the 8-acre zone. We hadn't had that, guys, in 30 years. I never had that. That's some of the advanced technology that the Motorola now can provide, as well as working on the fertilizer. A lot of times my growers, to be able to find out how much went into that field, they got to where they had separate fertilizer lines that fed all the way out to the 20 acres of the injection point, and we're measuring at the injection point so that can get done. There's a difference in the technology. We're starting to work on taking the data, being able to implement the weight, the pounds of the type of stuff that you're using, and being able to run that calculation through, and it divides it up. It's learning, and this is part of the AI. It's learning how to make those calculations and to be able to make those adjustments. Then with collecting some of this smart data, you can now take your weather station as well as your soil moisture sensors and apply commands or conditions in there. We're now have been for years collecting the pH, the EC, the again the soil moisture. Now into the system, knowing your soil type, you can literally say, hey, if it gets 1 inch of rain and the ET is at this calculation, reduce or increase the irrigation. That is being done right now, guys, in certain applications and in some of our labs. Again, going back to the temperature, the humidity, the ET, the solar radiation, the wind speed, the wind direction. This is another important thing that we have found in the years of with collecting all the data, being able to provide this data that we have helped growers in situations where their neighbor accused them of spraying and the wind was blowing in their direction, and accused of the farmer of spraying some kind of chemical into their yard or into their property. Several occasions, by being able to get this data, we have proved that the neighbor was wrong and the farmer was right. He didn't spray in their yard and it wasn't going in their direction. Again, using the soil moisture, again, collecting that data, being able to say, hey, when I hit 10%, halt the data, or halt the irrigation, start the irrigation at a certain point, stop the irrigation. Again, these are now if and whens and conditions. We've been doing this though for at least 10 plus years with the commands of just starting and stopping the irrigation according to soil moisture level. Now, this is one we recently done with the 10 rain buckets. You know, this client has a weather station and 10 rain buckets. You can see his monthly, weekly rains events. Then also, because we can GPS, put the earth pictures of the farms on there, you can now, they can see their buckets and their rain rates. Oh, this is the water pressure. You can see the water pressure. They can see who's irrigating. These are the controllers here. If there's lightning in the area, an alarm will sound. People get texts if you want to get texts if there's lightning. I know sometimes the growers for the pickers would have those lightning alarms in the fields that then they would have on there to know if they're getting in a dangerous situation. This goes back again to us being able to monitor and do commands to reservoir levels, as sometimes people have to lift and to put water in the different stagings to move it to the areas where we have ditches and ponds. Fuel tank levels. Again, we can do the old that is set a certain level and it sends a message, or if you want it to look like your car and show you the empty, the mid, the full, that can be done. This is also a cost savings of the labor of the people that used to have to run around. I have one grove that has 106 diesel tanks. They had the one guy that used to go and stick 106 diesel tanks. Now they can look up here, see the level. It's time for the diesel man to come. They print out the paperwork and the diesel man knows where to go. Another thing I like to say about utilizing the soil moisture sensor, these are comments coming from my customers. One grower alone about 10 years ago, when he started using his soil moisture sensor, this is about 5,000, a little bit over acre. He said, from what they learned, they just saved $1 million in diesel fuel alone by over irrigating. Again, showing the different customizations with using weather station. If the temperature hits 75 degrees, do this. If we're going into a cold night and we hit 34 degrees, turn on the irrigation. But when we hit 40 degrees, turn off the irrigation. These again, time, labor, knowledge. All of this is important tools that we learn to use. Another important one that I want to talk about is the ridge, because we've talked a lot about here in the flat sandy soil and the ridge. One of the things known is that when a certain project that I worked on, back in a lot of the citrus in the ridge, they would do what we call old method of irrigation of water every couple of days, like 4 hours, and it's like almost like the old water boiler. Dry them out, drown them, dry them out, drown them, you know. And so after they started irrigating every day, they started out with a 4-level sensor so that they could get the different root zones and levels. This in particular customer decided after their year and 2 of study that they needed one sensor at 8 inch, and it told them majority of everything they needed to know. If anything, it told them that they needed to water every day. So they started irrigating in their tests every day at 3 o'clock. We had safety alarms at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It literally sounded like the police force was coming after you because all the engines cranked up. There was a safety alarm, so all the woo woo, you know, like, hey, if you're a mechanic, get back. This is fixing to start, all that good stuff, and they start irrigating. Well, after about a couple months of that, I get a call out of the blue, and the girl says, Sonia, you don't know how much money you just saved us today. I'm like, what are you talking about? The maintenance. The animals are getting used to every single day. The water is coming on at 3 o'clock. So the rabbits, some of the other creatures aren't chewing the drip tubes and the other things because they know the water is going to come out. The ants aren't going into the drip tube to look for the water. And then when they get stuck or not in the drip tube, in the microjets, then they would, when the water would come on, they would clog up the jet. So these are just different things that they were telling me out of the blue that I'm like, okay, well, that's super cool. So glad y'all learned that. And again, using the EC sensors, pH sensors. We're doing some experiments with some dissolved oxygens, pressures transducers, level canals, level devices. So thank you all very much. And if anybody would like to have any questions. Okay.
All right. Sorry for going over y'all. We got one left. We've got Roy Curry coming to share a little bit about cost share programs with you. And then I did get the CCA approval just came through. So I have this for you to sign before you leave. It actually gives you credit to 330, so kind of works out.
Yeah, I'm Roy Curry. I work with Florida Department of Ag now. Did the ag water policy during the BMP program. BMP program, best management practices. We do offer cost share on pretty much everything they talked about today. Automation, soil moisture sensors, fertigation. I've actually been involved in converting fields from seepage to drip. Saved tons of water. And it did, you know, it's on a site-by-site basis on what they'll save and getting the bang for the buck for the state now. That's their main goal now. Little projects, they still do. Automation, they love. Some people don't, some people do. It, you know, don't matter to me. It's good. It's all good. Our BMP program, our last commissioner and stuff changed it some to where the qualifications are a little bit harder to get. If you're a farmer that leases from CAR, you get year to year. Well, it's hard to do cost share year to year, so they required 5, 10, 20-year leases on different things for our different programs, depending on the lifespan of the item we're cost sharing. But like I said, it's case by case. If we can show that, yes, it will save this much money, this much water, it'd reduce irrigation, reduce fertilization and all that. Hey, they may go for it if you did year by year, 2-year lease or something like that. It's, you know, so don't count yourself out just because you don't have a 20-year lease. The worst thing they can say is no. You get 2 quotes, you turn it in, and they'll say yes or no. If they say yes, look at what you'll save, 75%. Our program is 2 quotes, turn it in, I'll come back with an application. You sign the application, I turn that in. If they come back with approval, we get the cost share agreement, W-9 and direct deposit form filled out all at one time. That way it saves soil and water districts time on returning the money. You install, you buy the sensors, you install, have Sonia come out and do the automation. You pay her, pay him, pay Doug. You show me the checks, copy of the checks front and back and the invoice. I come out, I'll take pictures of it, look at it, sign the request for reimbursement. And usually within 3 to 4 days at the most, you have the money back into your bank account. So it's a quick turnaround on the money, which is a big plus nowadays. Before, when they did the checks, they had to get two board members to sign each check and then they mail it or this or that. So then the producer wouldn't deposit the check right away. So the soil and water districts was waiting for that check to clear for them to bill the state to get reimbursed. So it's a hassle. Now they do it all direct deposit, quick, easy, simple. Any questions? Nope. See, quick and easy.
All right, Sanjay, you're coming back? For anyone who wants to stay.
How many years do you want to stay? Midnight? All right. Well,
One last thing though, real quick. One last thing real quick. One thing that if we had a little more time, I'd talk a little bit about, but instead I'll just kind of throw it out there for you to think about and consider as you go, is the other thing that I've learned about this is we talked about what HIPAA's changed at the beginning, some of these different things. One of the other things is risk management. And so the question is risk management for whom? Obviously it looks very different at the different levels between the company, production manager, farm manager, irrigation manager. Sometimes some of these are the same depending on your business, but who is it that's making a potential decision or trying to push irrigation management change? Who is that has to implement it? What are the risks for them? I think that's important to think about in order to continue to strive to be better at what we do in irrigation management. And of course, there's competing priorities within that. And I even wonder how might something like incentive pay be something to help drive precision irrigation management implementation. So just some things to kind of throw out there to think about within your companies. You can potentially talk about it a little bit, but obviously there's a lot of different things going on. If your main thing is providing food for your family, but you're the one whose job is at risk if things don't go well, that's a little bit different than someone who's a little bit higher up the chain that would like to see the company move in a certain direction. So just something to think about for you all, something we don't really usually talk about, but I think it's important to kind of get out in the open. Otherwise it won't be addressed. So that's it. You're free to go. You're free to stay. Thank you all for coming. Again, CCA forms in the back. If you didn't sign in, I have to turn that in for the meal stuff. So if you didn't sign in, please sign the forms on the left, CCA is on the right.
So those of you who want to stay and want to see some of the more data and the questions you guys ask, you're welcome to stay. I need to know how many of you will